Learning outcomes. Consolidate what you learned in chapter 12 and 14. 12 to 14, revisit ideas you came across in chapters 12 to 14 in a cross-cultural context. Introduction. This last chapter of section 3 is the final growing up globally perspective on child development. As before, all the key points from each chapter are repeated here, so the essential takeaways are in one place. And we re-examine what we have already covered from a more global perspective. Who do teenagers think they are? Recap and consolidation. Identity development is an important part of adolescence in which young people work out who they are, what they believe in, and how they present themselves to others. Genetic and environmental influences are significant factors in explaining the differences between people's personalities. Estimates of heritability increases through a lifespan. Heritability is caused by many genes, each of which contributes a small effect. The environment shows some degree of heritability too. Social interaction with friends and family shapes adolescents' identity by supporting identity exploration, fostering a sense of personal autonomy, and highlighting uniqueness from others. Rituals that mark the passage into adulthood, rites of passage, and coming of age ceremonies are common features of many societies. Across cultures, key indicators of adulthood are taking personal responsibility for your actions and independence from others. Rites of passage and coming of age ceremony signal an adolescent's new status in the community, to adolescents themselves and to their parents. Adolescents have been drivers of cultural change and innovation throughout history. Several cognitive and social factors make adolescence a period of creativity. Who do you want to be? I want to be AKA, of course. The AKA are a diverse set of forage groups living in a small, intimate camps of 25 to 35 individuals in the tropical forests of the Congo Basin. We first learned about this society when we looked at imitation and pretend play in the Mbengel, a subgroup of the AKA. In chapter 6, the daily life of AKA children is characterized by physical and emotional intimacy, self-motivated and directed learning, personal autonomy, extensive sharing and giving, trust of others, and frequent play, as well as socializing and resting in mixed age groups. By 10 years of age, AKA have acquired most of the skills necessary for life in the forest. They know how to net fish, hunt, gather plants, honey, nuts, and mushrooms, prepare food, take care of babies, build huts and baskets, and make medicines for illnesses. This lived experience is important for understanding how AKA children become AKA adolescents. When anthropologist Bonnie Hewlett asked one young AKA boy, "What do you want to be or do when you are older?" the boy simply replied, "I am AKA." Hewlett, 2012. The question of who do you want to be is not really a question that needs answering. When from a very young age, children in society have been apprentices in the skills and roles they are expected to assume as adults, encouraged by a community that values exploration and independence. Figure 15.1. Compare this with the careers option laid out before the average American high school student, not to mention the possible gender, music, dress, online and mental health identity options available to them. As a student, I once filled out the online career questionnaire, and based on my responses, The algorithm suggested I was best suited to being a lumberjack or an accountant. In many Western societies, an extended period of higher education may mean delaying professional identity until well into mid-adulthood. But for most of human history, children started their apprenticeship at 7 years old, not 27. Gopnik, 2016. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when many societies shifted from rural and agricultural way of life to one of them that was urban and industrial. Around the same time, formal schooling started to appear for children, while their parents, for the first time in human history, were far away at work. This led to some profound changes in everyday lives of children, including in the ways they learn. Whereas before, children spent most of their days with a family member and got involved in everyday activities of the home and community, now children spent most of their days in school, being trained for the workforce. There was a big reduction in play that was generated by children, and an increase in play was created and monitored by adults. There was also a big reduction in mixed age groups because it was more efficient to teach same age groups. But this also meant fewer opportunities for children to learn from older children and practices caring for younger ones. Lansford et al. 2021. High-stake testing in formal schooling, where a lot of is riding on the outcomes of a particular test for both student and teacher, has been associated with a number of negative outcomes for children, including higher dropout rates, high levels of test anxiety, and lower academic self-confidence if students do not do as well as they're expected. Segul et al. 2013. Compare this with learning through participation, in which children get involved in practical activities alongside older children or adults involved in the daily activities of life, which is especially important in cultural contexts where explicit instructions is uncommon. Lancey et al. 2010. In these contexts, children receive a practical introduction to the roles and responsibilities they will face later on in life. For example, learning to weave or fish. Adults support this process through guided participation, structuring interactions, and giving tasks appropriate to the child's needs and ability. Apprentice style on the job learning potentially also makes a far smoother transition between childhood and adolescence and young adulthood, as children gradually take on increasing power, responsibility, and autonomy. Because of this, aka adolescence does not appear to be a time of marked turmoil or rebelliousness, indicating that increasing independence does not need to be gained at the experience of family closeness. aka adolescents are granted a high degree of autonomy. There is a lack of parental interference, and they are acknowledged as unique individuals by others. In such circumstances, what is there to rebel against? Key point. Cross-cultural differences in daily lives of children significantly affect how they think about their identity and the transition to adulthood. How do adolescents think about risk and reward, recap, and consolidation? Adolescents have a lower mortality rate than those in most other stages of life, but are more likely to be accidentally injured and to engage in risky behaviour, and they are poorer at judging the long-term consequences of their actions. Novelty and sensation-seeking behaviours with greater risk-taking and peer influence are seen in a wide range of species on the cusp of adulthood, suggesting a shared evolutionary explanation. Adolescence is a time of investigating peer relationships, heightened sensitivity to group identity and emotional intensity. The reward system of the brain mature earlier and are more well connected in adolescence than those that keep impulses in check and deliberate over alternative choices. Knowing or believing that peers are observing their behavior significantly increases the risk-taking behavior of adolescents, even in the absence of any direct peer pressure. The behavior of early adolescence is strongly guided by social environment, both for positive and negative outcomes. Sex differences in mortality and risk-taking persist within smaller societies, between different societies, and across a wide variety of species and environments. Life history theory predicts that boys are willing to engage in risky behavior in same-sex competitive contexts. Executive functions represent a collection of skills that enable us to be flexible, controlled, and focused. Executive functions are associated with a wide range of outcomes for children and take a long time to mature. There is some evidence to suggest that inhibitory control emerges earlier for girls than boys, underpinned by earlier maturation of the brain areas that support this function. I can resist anything but temptation. Part of growing up involves learning to regulate behavior in culturally appropriate ways to do so. We use our executive functions, the collection of skills that include working, memory, cognitive flexibility, and inhibitory control. Executive functions are still undergoing significant change during adolescence and do not reach full maturity until early adulthood. A classic measure of inhibitory control is the marshmallow test. Children are left alone in a room with a marshmallow and told that they can eat one marshmallow now and wait some time and eat two marshmallows later. The basic idea is that a tempting response, eat the marshmallows now, needs to be resisted or inhibited in order to achieve a different goal. Eat two marshmallows later. Yanakoka and his colleagues suspected that what children were being asked in inhibit would affect how good they are inhibiting it, and furthermore that these differences would be related to customs around awaiting in different cultures. 2022, they found that Japanese children delayed gratification longer for food than for gifts, whereas American children delayed gratification longer for gifts than for food. This suggests culturally specific habits support delaying gratification. Waiting to eat is emphasized more in Japan than in America, whereas waiting for open gifts is emphasized more in America than in Japan. Figure 15.2. Lam and colleagues, 2018, used a similar marshmallow test with children from rural Cameroon, NSO families, and middle-class German families. The Cameroon NSO children were better in delaying gratification than they were the German children, and the researchers argued that this was because children were picking up on what their mothers valued, which in turn were reflections of a wider cultural beliefs. As revealed by a questionnaire, NSO mothers tended to value social harmony and respect for authority and older people, whereas the German mothers valued teaching their children to express personal preferences and ideas. This made the German children more likely to follow their immediate impulses in expressing their agency and eating the marshmallow now, whereas the NSO children, who had more experience of inhibiting their impulses to maintain social harmony and show obedience, were more likely to be able to wait and so eat two marshmallows later. These studies, along with others, show how cultural values embodied by the behaviors that parents encourage or discourage have a significant effect on the development of executive functions. The economic background children grow up in also seems to matter. In one study, a group of highly disadvantaged children outperformed children of middle and high social economic backgrounds on some tests of executive function. Howard et al. 2022. It might be that to survive and thrive in such disadvantaged circumstances, children need extra vigilance, autonomy, and adaptability, skills that would require regular and efficient use of their executive functions. The authors make it clear that these results do not mean that we should disadvantage children to improve their executive functions, rather than do suggest that highly disadvantaged backgrounds do not automatically translate into negative cognitive outcomes and can even be sources of strength if the risks are mild. Key point: executive functions are present in children around the world. What those executive functions work on is a more culturally variable. Oh, my eyes are well sore.